formal aspect of our opening will begin shortly. Did everybody get something to eat or a beverage? Come on, it's a little bit cramped here in the first gallery, but make sure you can see. And we have this big puppet stage in the middle of the room, which is fine. So, are we live streaming this? Yeah. As always, we're live streaming this. So, welcome to our new exhibition, Wonderland Puppet Theater: Visions of the Beloved Community, about the work of Alice Swan and Nancy Schmale. Is it Schmale? Schmale. Thank you. I know you said that a million times. Curated by our friend Dr. Paulette Richards. Yay. Which focuses on the work of Alice and Nancy from the 1960s to, they're sort of active into the 70s and 80s, and then actually beyond that. And this is a very exciting story, as you will see. And I really think it's a story. We were talking about quilts and story quilts, and I was saying, because my wife Trudy and her family makes quilts, and I was saying, I don't know if they make story quilts, but this is really a story, I find. So we'll see. We want to thank our team, Emily Wicks, our Manager of Operations and Collections, and the Interwebs connection, Anthony Salido, our Coordinator of Exhibitions and Workshops, and our student workers, Sadie Aiken, who I don't know where they are, Maria Palacio Cano, Thomas Busemeyer, whose band Ruby Left Step will be the house band for the Puppet Slam coming up, Caitlin LaRose, and our student graphic designer, Johan Velas, who is here. I thought you were in London and flew over from, but no, you're going to London.
I am going.
So thank you. So graphic design. Okay, and then we wanted to thank also Dr. Richards, who didn't only show up to oversee everything, but has been working on the sewing machine, like in true puppeteer fashion, hands-on, making all of this, all these puppet stages happen. Stage curtains and rags and fabric needs. We're deeply indebted to Jeff and Lorene Swan for preserving the Wonderland Puppet Theater puppets and digitizing the archive of scripts, correspondence, clippings, audio recordings, etc., some of which you see here. The QR codes on the different labels connect to the Wonderland website that they created. And we also, of course, are indebted to the work that Nancy Schmale and Alice Swan put into their puppetry careers. We want to offer a special welcome to Deanna Fitzgerald, our new Dean of the School of Fine Arts, who's here it might be your first official public appearance.
It might be. Thanks for having me.
Great, welcome. And we benefit from longtime supporters like Bob Leo, who's here right there, and Philip Majorana, whose gifts supported our summer performance series outdoors. So we hope you'll visit our other various programs in the semester that's just starting. And I think we have, maybe we don't have a mailing list, maybe not. Yeah, we do, we have a mailing list. So you can sign the mailing list and find out more about things like our puppet forums, the first one on Wednesday, September 18th, about puppet slams. If you don't know what puppet slams are, you can find out. That's going to be with Heather Henson, who's supporting the puppet slams through the Puppet Slam Network and others. Also, our own Yukon Fall Puppet Slam, which will be Friday, September 20th, and we're hoping all the puppet art students here and elsewhere will participate in that. Thumbs up. Okay, good. And our community puppet pageant for the Celebrate Mansfield Festival. The festival is outdoors Saturday, September 28th, and our open community workshops with Sarah Peaty from Puppeteers Cooperative in Boston will happen the weekend of the 14th to 15th. Paulette Richards, Dr. Richards was here. Last project here was to co-curate Living Objects African American Puppet Theater, an exhibition, festival, and symposium in 2019. And since that time, she's been doing a lot. She's published an important book, Object Performance in the Black Atlantic, which is right there in her hand, which includes a chapter on Wonderland Puppet Theater. She's organized exhibitions for museums and festivals. She's been curating the Ellen Van Valkenburg Puppetry Symposia for the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival. So deeply involved in intellectual history, the history and the theory and the practice of puppetry, and she'll be doing that again this January. She's been teaching puppet dramaturgy and the metaphysics of object performance, that's online, that's a class I'd like to take. And she's curating with us a Wonderland Puppet Theater Symposium that will take place here at the Ballard Institute Friday, October 25th and Saturday, 25th and the Saturday the 26th, which will give us further opportunities to consider the work of Alice Swan and Nancy Schmally in the context of the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned in the 60s, a space of social equity and belonging, peace and freedom from prejudice. Like this exhibition, the symposium will look at the matrix of social and political contexts of the Wonderland Puppet Theater from the 60s onward, including the civil rights movement, the women's movement, children's television, and fair housing, and their own work. So I was thinking of a friend of mine, Max Stein. She just published a book called Funny Boy, the Richard Hunt biography, which is about a puppeteer from the Jim Henson Company who had an amazing career with various Henson projects until his death from AIDS in 1992. And what's fascinating about Max Stein's book is not I use the word frisson, that's a little affected, frisson of excitement that comes from, say, biographies of celebrated puppeteers like Jim Henson or Bill Baird or Kevin Clash, but the complicated challenges that we puppeteers face as we maneuver in our typically low-paying and sometimes misunderstood field. And with Richard Hunt and with Max's book, we understand what it was like for a gay puppeteer at the end of the 20th century to try to balance tremendous commercial success that he got from working with Henson, his family responsibilities, his larger family, which he took charge of, and then the spiritual outlook he developed late in his life as he became HIV positive and dealt with there wasn't a cure for AIDS at that time, as he came to terms with that deadly disease. So I appreciated that, somebody who's not super famous. In a different but no less fascinating and important manner, I think Wonderland Puppet Theater, Visions of the Beloved Community, helps us understand how two women, black woman and a white woman in suburban Philadelphia, inspired by progressive visions of the 60s, decided to create a puppet theater in, of, and beyond their community. So that's my introduction to Dr. Paulette Richards. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for coming out. I'm not going to do a tour per se, but I'm going to do a framing of what you can see and read about all around the gallery. So in 2020, a gentleman named Jeff Swan contacted me about a collection of puppets that needed a home. And unfortunately, we have many puppeteers who've had long careers, have collected an enormous number of puppets, and there are a lot of collections of puppets looking for somewhere to go after their owners pass on. I was a member of the Acquisitions Committee for the Worlds of Puppetry Museum at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. And I was also serving on the advisory board for the Ballard Institute and Museum of Puppetry here at the University of Connecticut. So Steve Abrams, who was then the editor of Puppetry Journal, had connected me with Mr. Swan. Unfortunately, both museums had put a moratorium on accepting puppets during the pandemic. So Jeff was retiring and preparing to move out of the country, so he could not continue to store his mother's legacy. I suggested photographing all the puppets and digitizing all the archival documents So we're talking about 20 suitcases worth of stuff here. Jeff completed this Herculean task in record time and generously gave me access to the collection. This archival treasure trove then became the basis of Chapter 13 in Object Performance in the Black Atlantic, my book on African American puppetry. Writing that chapter, which is called African American Puppet Modernism, in response to a certain person that we know and love, Alice Swan, this chapter drove home to me the importance of puppets as material culture artifacts that give us insights into the day-to-day lives of ordinary people. So I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of historiography, more so than performance studies. While the Ballard is not equipped to conduct scientific analysis of the fabrics and fibers used to construct the puppets that you see around, they have held up remarkably well for over 60 years. And that tells us something about the quality of textiles then versus now. The mechanisms incorporated simple household items like empty spools of thread, which were made of wood rather than plastic in the 1960s and 70s, which some of us will remember. Yet beyond the material culture elements, the Wonderland Puppet Theater also opened fascinating approaches to historiography. Thematic analysis of the shows in the Wonderland Puppet Theater's repertoire, along with the cache of archival documents, the oral history sources recorded in the digital archive, and you can see a video of Alice and Nancy giving a tour of an exhibit that they organized in 2008 as part of that, and also interviews I conducted with the children of the puppeteers offered unique insights on a period of rapid change in American society. And we've kind of broken that down in our timeline into the categories that John mentioned: civil rights history, women's movement history, children's television history, and then the baseline is where Alice and Nancy were in their careers at any given moment. So you can see the correlations. So I'll start with the civil rights movement. The Wonderland Puppet Theater began in Concord Park, Pennsylvania, in a subdivision outside of Philadelphia. It was founded by housing rights activist Moritz Milgram, and you can see his photograph in this first case here. He developed it as an intentionally integrated community in 1956, and we have to keep in mind that in that time period, many deeds to homes had restrictive covenants embedded in them, which said that the property could not be sold to black people and sometimes also to Jewish people. The residents of Concord Park were attempting to live Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of the beloved community. Yet Bucks County, this is where Concord Park is located, was slow to provide basic services such as sewers, a branch library, a recreation center, or kindergarten classes. Neighbors therefore banded together to provide these amenities for themselves. The developer, Milgram, gave a plot of land in the neighborhood that he could have used to sell another house, and the fathers got together and built a playground on it. They also created a lending library that was in a neighbor's home, and Alice Swan was central to establishing local kindergarten classes because she was a certified kindergarten teacher. Swan met Nancy Schmally in 1958 when Nancy inquired about enrolling her daughter in the kindergarten that Alice was running for the community. The two became friends and began organizing summer recreational activities for the neighborhood children. In 1961, Nancy saw Bill Baird's script for The Magic Onion in Woman's Day magazine. Let me pause here for Puppet People trivia quiz. Bill Baird. Bill Baird.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what did he do? What's the touchstone that everybody knows? Yes! I am a hill, there's a lonely goat,
The lonely goat.
He built those puppets. Okay. So he had written a script. It was published in Women's Day magazine with instructions on how to build the puppets. Nancy saw it, and she went 2 doors down, knocked on Alice's window, because Alice was always in the window washing dishes, because she had 5 children. And said, we should do this puppet show. And Alice said, you're crazy. But they decided to do it in the end. And they got the whole community involved in developing this puppet show. Some neighbors helped to build the puppets, which basically meant sewing them. Some neighbors became involved as puppeteers, so it was the adults putting the show on for the kids. And at the end of the summer, they did a performance in Nettie Mae Hare's backyard. And they did it in Hare's backyard because she was the composer of the original music for the show. And she performed it on her piano, which she rolled to the back of the house, opened the windows so people can hear, and that was the soundtrack for the show. So we have about 100, 150 people sitting in the backyard outside of this house. And the stage was a refrigerator carton that had been discarded. Somebody got a new fridge. And so they performed with these. These are the actual puppets from that original show. They performed over the refrigerator carton, and it was a tremendous success. One of the songs from the show, "The Things That We Don't Understand Are the Things That We're Afraid of," became an anthem for the community's efforts to build interracial understanding and cooperation, because as the verse goes later, but we're no longer afraid when we know what things are made of. So when we live together, we work together, we get to know each other, then we're not afraid of each other anymore. So that's what I have to say about how this puppet company intersects with the civil rights movement. How does it intersect with the women's movement? Nancy and Alice continued performing together for over 20 years and formed a lifelong interracial friendship. When they started their journey in puppetry, they were housewives with 7 children between them. Alice had 5 and Nancy had 2. Puppetry likely served as their solution to what Betty Friedan described as the problem with no name. In other words, they both had college degrees, they both had gifts and aspirations, and what were they doing most of the time? Washing dishes and wiping noses and bottoms and driving people places. So in 1963, Betty Friedan came out with this book, The Feminine Mystique, which described this problem with no name. And so the experiences of these 2 women show the personal dimensions of the era's sexual politics. And one of the slogans of the women's movement was, the personal is political. So we get down to stuff like, who is going to wash the dishes and who is going to do laundry? And I'm going away for a weekend to participate in this puppet festival, and what is the family going to eat while I'm gone? Well, in Alice's case, that meant that she stayed up late cooking and putting stuff in the refrigerator and the freezer for her husband to warm up while she was away. You can then understand why she was moved to draft a response to Alice K. Schulman's famous essay on the marriage agreement, lamenting that it was too late to negotiate a more equitable division of household chores with her husband. Though they never supported themselves from puppetry, Alice and Nancy were consummate professionals whose resumes map careers analogous to some of the puppeteers active in the early 60s downtown scene in New York City. So here again, we're intersecting with the women's movement because this is how women's careers were affected by the roles that they had to play in that time. So things they accomplished. They established the Wonderland Puppet Theater as a nonprofit organization, and everything that they earned above expenses they gave to UNICEF. They joined the Philadelphia Guild of Puppeteers of America. Starting with the 1963 festival in Hurleyville, New York, they attended national P of A festivals. Check. They joined the Puppeteers Guild of Greater New York and performed with them at the 1964 World's Fair in New York City. Check. They also performed at the Museum of the City of New York for several seasons. Check, check, check. Their performance at the 1967 P of A Festival in Ontario, Canada was reviewed in Unima France magazine. Check. They performed with the Bucks County Symphony Orchestra. Check. Alice also presented in the O'Neill Theater Center's Theater for the Deaf program. Check. Okay. Perhaps their most significant professional achievement was puppeteering on Story Corner, a weekly educational television show hosted by Willa Dean Bain on channel WHYY in Philadelphia from 1966 to 68. So maybe we have some Philadelphia natives who are familiar with WHYY, but it was a thing. And so Story Corner is back there in the corner, and that yes, yay, shout out to Philadelphia.
One Canada, one Philadelphia.
Okay, right.
Yay.
Yeah, so that brings us to the third strand in our timeline, which is children's media. Story Corner was just one of over 1,000 local children's television programs that existed before Sesame Street, and we often lose sight of that history. Most of these shows featured puppet characters. Thus, television puppetry was a source of employment for puppeteers all over the country. Besides Willa Dean Bain, however, I have only been able to identify one other African-American host of a children's television show broadcast in this period. Part of the reason is that most of those shows were supported by sponsors. They were commercial programs. In that time period, no sponsors would have believed that an African-American host would help them earn more business. So we would not have seen an African-American host of a children's show on commercial television. Willa Dean Bain and the other gentleman, Carl M. Williams, hosted shows on educational television stations. So Williams hosted a show called Volume C, which was produced by KDPS in, of all places, Des Moines, Iowa. Anybody from Iowa? Okay. So Willa Dean Bain and Alice Swan were certified teachers, unlike the hosts of commercial television shows for kids who were personalities, good performers. Sometimes these shows had educational content, but they were not trained educators. They collaborated on scripts for the show, which anticipated Sesame Street's mission of promoting reading readiness. In 2020, more than 60 years after Alice Swan first performed on Story Corner, Megan Pipus became the first African-American woman to puppeteer on Sesame Street. To date, no African-American women have been identified as script writers for the show. And I contacted the archivist and asked. They haven't given me any names yet. So, Jeff Swan promised his mother on her deathbed that he would keep the effort and love she put into her puppetry career alive. I am deeply thankful to John Bell, Emily Wicks, Anthony Salito, and the staff at the Ballard Institute for giving me the opportunity to amplify the Wonderland Puppet Theater's vision of beloved community. Thank you.
Should we briefly go through and sort of tell people what's there, what's here? Okay. All right. So, well, over here in the corner, as you suggested, we're looking at Morris Milgram, who is a very interesting developer who who had this dream to create integrated interracial housing. You know, this is the post-war time of Levittown in New York State, and also there was a Levittown in Philadelphia. So he had a hard time getting the financing, but created Concord Park, and I think Concord is a significant term there, and people moved in. He decided that it should be more than half, 55% white folks and 45% black folks, fearing that whites would not purchase homes in a predominantly black community. But it created this integrated community, as Dr. Richards was pointing out, and you can see sort of the houses that were built at that time, which I grew up in a house like that in Old Greenwich, Connecticut for a while. And he wrote a book called Good Neighborhood, The Challenge of Open Housing, Morris Milgram. So this is the time when housing equity or open housing was a question people felt they could deal with. You mentioned the first show they did, The Magic Onion, based on a play like Bill and Cora Baird. This is the dance contest. These were sort of an ongoing series of shows that Wonderland would do, kind of inspired by the Philadelphia TV show American Bandstand. So you'd have a contest with different people dancing, and one of the characters was Hippocrates Hobson, who would do all sorts of different dances. According to Paulette, he would break dance. Thinking of, I think probably better than Ray Gun at the. No, I'm not trying to shade on her, but and would dance on his head. So we weren't able to install him on his head, but maybe we'll do that. As you can see here, he won the trophy. So I mean, they built a lot of different puppets and used them in different shows. So some of these puppets performed in different shows. This is the puppets for Carnival of the Animals, the famous production with music by Camille Saint-Saëns, I don't know how to pronounce that. And they used some of their own animal puppets, sometimes recordings of the music on a LP record player. Sometimes they performed with the Bucks County Symphony Orchestra. And we sort of made a replica of their hand puppet stage, which is, you can see in this photograph here, that was taken in 1964, I think, when they went to the New York World's Fair and played at the New York State Pavilion, together with Pagogny, which is the Puppetry Guild of Greater New York. So coming out, and here we have, there's a nice photo of the two of them, and Nancy and Alice, and these two larger characters, Curly the Giant and Dimples the Giant, from The Valiant Little Tailor, which is a European folk tale about a tailor who kills 7 flies with one blow, and develops a sort of undeservedly a fearsome reputation. So, right, yeah, and Paulette points out that, you know, part of their thinking about their work was to think about violence, you know, because, I mean, as you can tell from the timeline, along at the end of the 60s, there's a lot of violence, you know, the violence that comes upon the children in Alabama who were trying to integrate their schools and were beaten by the police, the assassinations of King and Malcolm X and others, the Kennedys. So they decided that since nonviolence was a core tenet of Dr. King's philosophy, they would step away from using violence in their shows, which is actually something that comes up a lot now in contemporary puppet theater. That's German.
Yeah,
That's why
Ralph
it's
is from Germany, so he knows the tale.
Yeah.
They thought that they killed 7 in one shot, 7 people, but it
Oh,
was
7 flies, I thought.
Yeah, but
oh, then they.
the,
Yeah, okay.
the story is
Yes. Yeah. It's a gruesome story.
yeah.
So here we have in the second gallery, moving into the story more. Another show they did was Peter and the Wolf. Again, you know, a famous tale, famous story that Sergei Prokofiev made into a musical piece that's often done with puppets. The Puppet Arts program did a version with the Boston Symphony a few years ago. This is their version, and Alice talks about it in the video. The audio is off right now, but she has very interesting stories about that show. they would sometimes take the rag off the front of the hand puppet stage, where you see that the puppets are hanging ready to be used. They would take that off so that people could see the sort of the behind the scenes ballet of operating the puppets and trading them off, and how that all works. You know, that they're very, like, what do I want to say about the puppets? They're homemade. There's a certain, it's a little bit rough aesthetic, but it has a lot of integrity and consistency, I think. So in the video, she talks about the practical mouth, and when you pull the string, the tongue comes up and he licks his lips, stuff like that. So that's like Peter and the Wolf, which of course would have been a popular tale for people to watch. This is Story Corner, which Paulette was talking about in terms of television and local television. One of the first exhibitions we did here was called Puppets Through the Lens, which was about puppetry and film and television and media. And one of the things that we realized was that there's sort of an unwritten history about local television in the 50s. You know, every city most cities in the United States had a local television station that was broadcasting children's entertainment, and they hired puppeteers. So there were thousands. There were many, many puppeteers all over the place. Like, there was a show in Hartford, there were shows in New Haven, there were shows in New York, but in Ohio and Chicago. And we don't know about that anymore because things became kind of centralized with the rise of Jim Henson, for one, and his great success in Sesame Street. But Story Corner on WHYY TV, home of fresh air, now, public television station, as Paulette was saying, was hosted by Willadine Bain, Miss Willie, and she and Alice would write scripts for their different shows, and here you can see the schedule of what they're doing, sort of for their weekly schedule of stories that they're going to tell. And you can see here, this is one of the giants that was in the other case in the first gallery. Different puppets that were used in this set that had bookshelves on as part of the set. And it's complicated. We were talking with Paulette, and when Children's Television's workshop, Sesame, starts with funding from the Ford Foundation, the federal government, and the Carnegie Foundations. It sort of centralized all the money for television into that production. And as a result, it reduced support for shows like Story Corner. So we sort of gained something nationally and internationally, but kind of lost something, including black educators and puppeteers who were performing children's educational work. So that's that. This here in this display case, right behind you, is some stuff about their performances at the Puppeteers of America festivals, including the festival in Hurleyville, in the Catskills in upstate New York. Here they are with puppeteers from the Philadelphia Guild, and they're with a Monteo family, Sicilian marionette. We had some of those in our last exhibition. And here they are at the 1967 PMA Festival in Ontario, which Paulette mentioned. And I mean, we didn't do this layout. It says Alice does a timeout while Nancy speaks. So I don't know what presentation they were making. But here, the local puppeteers will attend annual conclave. This was, the Philadelphia paper talking about their experience. At the festival in Hurleyville, Catskills, they did The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is over here. And Paulette points out that they were very proud. They used dry ice to have a cauldron. And I guess Alice had made Nancy had made the cauldron, and she had to put a little wedge under it to get it to be in the right position. and Jim Henson was in the audience at this P of A festival course. I think he directed that festival. And there's in the archive there's a letter to Carol Spinney, who played Big Bird, and it's like we were supposed to be paid for our performance in this festival. We haven't been paid yet, you know. But anyway, that's not the important thing about it. So the cauldron fell over with the dry ice, and they didn't know what to do. So they sort of turned off the record. They came out and in front of the stage and said, "Jim, what do we do now?" And Jim Henson said, "Keep going." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So they went back and kept going. So they got that advice from Jim Henson to help them keep going with their performance. This is a picture of them. They were just, thinking of what Paulette's talking about. There are not so many black puppeteers active. I think in the United States there's a few, but it's just so unusual what they're doing. So the Sorcerer's Apprentice and the program for that. This is a show, a Punch and Judy show. Punch and Judy, of course, the popular characters from going back to trickster, shaman, puppet characters, centuries old, going back all over the world, in Asia and Africa and in the Americas. The European version of that coming through Commedia dell'arte is Punch, Pulcinella, and Judy, famous for, as Paulette points out, Mr. Punch has a reputation as a notorious wife beater. This violence was part of this. And the Wonderland folks decided that this was kind of a problem. So when Alex Kate Schulman's essay that Paulette mentioned, A Marriage Agreement, came out in 1970, it inspired, was it Alice? Alice's response, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
So, which Paulette talked about, and here's a script for them. So they changed their Punch and Judy approaches. I like this script because it says burnout stress, Punch and Judy. So they did Punch and Judy shows, a number of different Punch and Judy shows. This one, of course, is Punch and Judy Christmas show. Maybe it was the night before Christmas. But they were trying to deal with the traditional violence, and changing that, which is what a lot of puppeteers now are trying to do when they approach doing Punch and Judy. So this was something that they were doing at that point in the 1980s. So I like this quote from Alice. "I have 5 children, and though I eked out time to do a few of the things I wanted, it was always done with tension, headaches resulting from guilt. Each time I turned to my hobby of puppeteering, I felt compelled to clean the house first." So, yeah, in a lot of the articles they talk about Mrs. James Swan and Mrs. Raymond Schmalley, which is, of course, how women, married women, were referred to. Late in life, or later in life, after they sort of went their separate ways, Alice and Nancy remarried, no longer lived in Concord Park. They did stay together, but Alice was commissioned to create a show called Aunt Maggie's Quilt. A artist from California, from San Francisco area, does a performance of that. We're hoping to bring her here, Aisha Sinclair. She does a version of Aunt Maggie's Quilt, which we're hoping to bring to the Ballard Institute this fall. But Alice was commissioned by the Friendly Quilters, an African-American quilting circle in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, to do a show. So she did Aunt Maggie's Quilt with a quilt and pieces of quilts, which we don't have here, which is sort of dancing around this is a little quilted frame of Harriet Tubman, and I don't know the text, the dramaturgy of the show, but this engagement with quilting and story quilts, of course, is another way of connecting to African American object performance culture, which is subjective, some of Dr. Richard's work. Over here, we get to sort of the end of this long-lasting relationship. I think Nancy had moved to Penswood, which is a retirement community, and Alice came to visit her, and they did a reunion performance of The Magic Onion in 2006 for Concord Park's 50th anniversary reunion. And they performed The Magic Onion once again. And then this is, I guess, both of them in Concord, or at that reunion. And then I forget when exactly they both passed away. I think Nancy passed away first. 2013, and then Alice passed away 2017. So this is a story. This whole exhibition is a story about these two women and how they navigated the life in the United States in the 60s at this very important time of much change, challenge, and how they embraced puppetry to get through that time. So, what else should we say about?
Did you talk
this?
about Peter and the Wolf?
Yeah, yes.
And
I
you
did.
talked about the rag off?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much for your